On a frosty December evening in 2024, Boston streets shimmered under a veil of freshly fallen snow. The city buzzed with life as people hurried along, their breaths forming small clouds in the biting air. Amid the urban hustle, nestled on a quiet corner, stood a small cafe aptly named Cozy Corner. Its warm, golden glow spilled invitingly onto the snow-covered sidewalks, offering a beacon of comfort to anyone seeking refuge from the cold. Inside, the cafe was alive with subtle sounds, the soft clink of spoons meeting porcelain, the low murmur of conversations, and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. The air was filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the faint sweetness of pastries, creating an atmosphere that felt like a warm embrace. Cozy Corner wasn't just a cafe, it was a sanctuary, a brief escape from the chaos outside. Mia Taylor, a 29-year-old waitress with an infectious smile and an innate sense of kindness, weaved effortlessly through the tables. Her every movement exuded grace, and her presence seemed to light up the room. Known for her genuine warmth and attentiveness, Mia had earned the affection of regular patrons. To her, each guest was more than just a customer. They were a person with a story, deserving of respect and care. Mia's philosophy was simple: kindness cost nothing, yet its value was immeasurable. That evening, as the wind howled outside, the cafe door swung open, letting in a burst of icy air. A tall man stepped inside, his figure wrapped in a thick coat and a beanie pulled low over his brow. His steps were unhurried as he made his way to a corner table, choosing a spot tucked away from the cafe's activity. Though his entrance was unremarkable, there was something about him, a quiet weariness in his posture, a heaviness in his gaze, that caught Mia's attention. While other patrons barely noticed him, Mia's instincts as a caregiver kicked in. She approached his table with her signature warmth, her voice soft and welcoming. "Good evening, sir. What can I get for you tonight?" she asked, her tone carrying a kindness that felt genuine and unforced. The man looked up, his face partially obscured by his beanie. For a moment, his tired eyes met hers, and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Just a black coffee and something light," he replied, his voice deep and slightly hoarse, as if worn from the day's trials. Mia nodded, her smile unwavering. "Coming right up," she said before walking toward the counter to prepare his order. She didn't recognize him, nor did she suspect that she was speaking to Keanu Reeves, the globally renowned actor who had spent the day on a grueling film set. For Keanu, this unassuming cafe had been a deliberate choice, a quiet retreat where he could momentarily shed the weight of fame. Returning with a steaming cup of black coffee and a small plate of pastries, Mia noticed the man holding his hand over the table, an ice pack pressed gently against his knuckles. Concern flickered in her eyes, and she hesitated before setting down the tray. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, her voice laced with genuine care. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Keanu glanced at her, his expression softening further. He shook his head, his smile barely visible but sincere. "I'm fine, thank you," he replied simply. Yet, for a brief moment, his eyes revealed something deeper, an unspoken gratitude, as though her kindness had eased a burden he hadn't expected to carry into the cafe. Mia lingered for just a second longer, her heart warmed by his quiet appreciation. To her, offering kindness was second nature, a reflex born from years of believing that small gestures could make a big difference. But for Keanu, her unprompted compassion felt like a rare gift, a reminder that goodness still existed in a world often consumed by its own noise. As the evening wore on, the cafe began to empty, leaving only a handful of patrons. The atmosphere grew quieter, the clinking of dishes replaced by the rhythmic hum of a nearby heater. Keanu remained at his corner table, sipping his coffee in thoughtful silence. The soft glow of the cafe lights seemed to envelop him, casting a sense of calm over the space. When he finally stood to leave, he approached the counter to settle his bill. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he were savoring the last moments of the cafe's warmth before stepping back into the cold. Handing his card to the cashier, he waited patiently, but the sudden beep of the machine interrupted the calm. The cashier frowned apologetically, I'm so sorry. Sir, the card machine seems to be down. Do you have cash instead? Keanu furrowed his brow, patting his coat pockets in search of his wallet. A soft sigh escaped him when he realized it wasn't there. I think I left my wallet in the car, he admitted, his voice low and tinged with embarrassment. He glanced around the cafe, his gaze briefly meeting the cashier's, as if searching for a solution. From a few feet away, Mia, who had been clearing empty cups from a nearby table, noticed the exchange. Without hesitation, she set down her tray and approached the counter. Her smile was gentle, her tone calm as she addressed the cashier. It's all right. I'll cover it, she said simply. Keanu turned to her, surprise flashing across his face. You don't have to do that, he said earnestly, his voice sincere. I can come back to pay once I grab my wallet. Mia shook her head, her smile unwavering. It's just a small amount. Don't worry about it. I trust you'll return, she said, her tone light but reassuring. For a moment, Keanu stood still, his expression a mix of gratitude and quiet disbelief. It wasn't often that strangers extended such selfless gestures, and her willingness to help him without hesitation struck a chord deep within him. Thank you, he said finally, his voice carrying a weight of emotion that belied the simplicity of the moment. Thank you for your kindness. Mia simply nodded, thinking little of the interaction. To her, it was just a small act of decency, a reflection of her belief that kindness always mattered. But as Keanu stepped back out into the snowy Boston night, his coat fluttering gently in the wind, he couldn't shake the thought that her gesture was something extraordinary. Neither of them could have known that this fleeting moment of compassion would spark a series of events that would forever change both of their lives. Mia approached the table with a steady hand, balancing a steaming cup of coffee and a small plate of pastries. The cafe was quieter now, the bustling energy of earlier in the evening beginning to wane. She noticed the man sitting alone, his hand resting on the table with an ice pack pressed against his knuckles. The way his shoulders slumped slightly and the faint tension in his posture didn't escape her observant eyes. Pausing for a moment, Mia set down the tray carefully and spoke, her voice soft and tinged with concern. Are you all right? She asked, her gaze dropping briefly to his hand before returning to his face. Is there anything else I can do for you? The man looked up, startled by the kindness in her tone. His lips curved into a small, almost shy smile. I'm fine. Thank you, he replied, his voice deep and calm, though it carried a faint edge of weariness. Despite his simple words, his eyes betrayed a quiet gratitude, as if her concern had chipped away, even momentarily, at an unseen weight he was carrying. Mia nodded, her smile warm and reassuring. To her, this was just another routine interaction, a small gesture of care she extended to anyone who needed it. But for the man sitting across from her, the sincerity in her expression and the gentle lilt of her words felt like a rare balm, a reminder that even in the humdrum of everyday life, genuine kindness still existed. As she walked away, returning to her duties, the man lingered in his corner, savoring his coffee in thoughtful silence. He hadn't revealed his identity. He didn't feel the need to. To the world, he was Keanu Reeves, a global star often surrounded by cameras and crowds. But here, in this small cafe tucked away from Boston's bustling streets, he was just another weary soul seeking refuge from a long, exhausting day. Hours passed, and the cafe began to empty. The chatter of customers dwindled, leaving behind only the soft clinking of dishes being cleared and the faint hum of the heater. The warm golden glow of the lights seemed to cast a comforting cocoon over the space, shielding it from the harshness of the winter night outside. The man finished his coffee and pastries, then rose from his seat. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if reluctant to leave the sanctuary he'd found within the cozy walls. Approaching the counter, he pulled out his wallet, or so he thought. When he reached into his pockets, his expression shifted. Furrowing his brow, he patted his coat, searching again, before letting out a soft sigh. The cashier, noticing his hesitation, offered a polite smile. Is everything all right, sir? She asked. He shook his head slightly, his voice lowering. I think I left my wallet in the car, he admitted, his tone tinged with embarrassment. "Can I come back to pay?" The cashier hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Before the moment could grow more awkward, Mia, who had been clearing a nearby table, noticed the exchange. Her brow furrowed in empathy, and she set her tray down without a second thought. Approaching the counter, her steps light and her expression calm, she spoke gently. "It's all right, sir," she said, her voice breaking the silence with a warmth that immediately eased the tension. "I can cover it for you." The man turned toward her, surprise flashing across his face. His brow lifted slightly, and for a moment, he seemed unsure of what to say. "You don't have to do that," he said earnestly, his voice carrying a sincerity that matched hers. "I can come back and pay once I grab my wallet." Mia shook her head, her smile unwavering. "It's just a small amount," she said simply, her tone reassuring. "Don't worry about it. I trust you'll return." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Keanu wasn't used to gestures like this, unprompted, selfless acts of kindness with no strings attached. He stood there for a moment, still and quiet, as if absorbing the sincerity in her gaze. The world he often navigated was one where favors came with expectations, where kindness was rarely given without motive. But here was someone who didn't even know who he was, offering to help without hesitation. Finally, he found his voice. "Thank you," he said softly, his tone carrying an unexpected weight of emotion. "Thank you for your kindness." Mia offered a small nod and returned to her tasks, thinking little of the moment. For her, this was simply who she was, someone who believed that small gestures could make a big difference. She didn't see her actions as extraordinary. They were simply part of her daily rhythm, a reflection of the values she held close. As Keanu stepped out into the night, the icy wind biting at his face, he felt something shift within him. The simple exchange had left an imprint on his heart, one that felt far more profound than he could have anticipated. The golden light of the cafe faded behind him as he walked away, his thick coat fluttering gently in the cold wind. But the warmth of Mia's gesture lingered, a quiet reminder that in a world often clouded by superficiality, true kindness could shine through. For Mia, the night continued like any other. She cleared tables, wiped down counters, and prepared for the cafe's closing routine. She didn't dwell on the interaction, nor did she think it would amount to anything beyond a fleeting moment of goodwill. But for Keanu, that brief encounter carried a weight that extended far beyond the walls of the cafe. As he drove away, his thoughts returned to the young woman with the radiant smile, her sincerity echoing in his mind. What neither of them could have known was how that small act of compassion would set off a chain of events that would alter both their lives. For Mia, it was just another gesture in a lifetime of giving. For Keanu, it was a reminder of humanity's capacity for goodness, a spark that reignited something within him he hadn't realized was dimming. And so, as the snowy streets of Boston lay silent under the starry sky, a simple moment of kindness began its quiet journey toward becoming something extraordinary. Mia was tidying up the cafe, her mind still quietly reflecting on the simple act of kindness she had extended earlier in the evening. The steady rhythm of clearing tables and wiping counters felt soothing after a long day, but her peace was abruptly shattered when the office door swung open. The sound of Mr. James's heavy footsteps echoed in the now quiet cafe. Mr. James, the cafe manager, was a man known for his strict demeanor and unwavering adherence to rules. His sharp gaze scanned the room before settling on Mia. His expression was a mix of suspicion and disapproval, his lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. "Mia," he called out, his voice firm and cutting through the silence like a knife. "Did you just pay for a customer?" Startled, Mia turned to face him, her hands still holding a damp cloth. His tone carried an edge that sent a chill through her. She straightened her posture, meeting his gaze with as much composure as she could muster. "Yes, sir," she said cautiously, her voice steady but tinged with unease. "The card machine wasn't working, and the customer didn't have cash." You thought? Mr. James interrupted harshly, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. His tone was icy, each word laced with criticism. "The rules are very clear, Mia. No one is allowed to handle money or make financial decisions without authorization. This isn't your decision to make. Mia's heart sank, but she held her ground. Her voice softened, carrying a note of hope as she tried to explain. It was just a small amount, she said earnestly. The customer promised to come back and pay. I only wanted to help. But her reasoning fell on deaf ears. Mr. James's expression hardened. His features set in stone. It doesn't matter how small the amount was, he said sharply, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. You broke the rules, and that cannot be overlooked. The weight of his words hit Mia like a cold gust of wind, leaving her momentarily frozen. She opened her mouth to speak, but the firmness in his gaze made it clear that there was no point in arguing. Starting tomorrow, you're no longer needed here, Mr. James declared, his voice cold and final. The world seemed to stop for Mia, her breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening as his words sank in. Fired? For helping someone in need? Her mind raced, searching for the right words, the right plea to make him understand. But none came. The injustice of it all made her stomach churn, but she knew no explanation would change his decision. Nodding numbly, Mia turned away, her movements mechanical as she made her way to the back room. She carefully gathered her belongings, her hands trembling slightly as she folded her apron and placed it into her bag. Each step out of the cafe felt heavier than the last, her heart weighed down by a mix of hurt and helplessness. Stepping into the cold night air, the biting chill stung her skin, but it paled in comparison to the ache in her chest. She paused just outside the cafe's warm glow, turning back to glance at the building one last time. Cozy Corner, which had once been a place of solace for her, now felt distant and unwelcoming. The golden light spilling from its windows seemed to mock her as she walked away into the darkness. Despite the weight of the moment, Mia clung to one thought that offered her comfort. She had done the right thing. She didn't regret helping the man who had needed her kindness, even if it had cost her so much. Her heart ached, but her resolve remained intact. She believed that the values she held dear, compassion, generosity, and doing what was right, were worth more than any job. Still, as she walked the quiet streets toward her small apartment, doubt crept into her mind. The reality of her situation loomed large, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead was daunting. How would she pay her rent? What will she do tomorrow? The questions swirled in her head, threatening to overwhelm her. But even in the face of these challenges, Mia held on to a small flicker of hope. Deep down, she knew that kindness, even in the smallest of moments, had a way of finding its way back. What she didn't know was how soon her own act of kindness would come full circle, changing her life in ways she could never have imagined. Later that evening, as the city streets fell quiet and the snow continued to blanket Boston, Keanu Reeves returned to the cozy cafe. This time, he had his wallet in hand, intent on settling his bill. The warm golden light from the cafe windows was the same, the hum of quiet conversations inside unchanged. But the energy felt different. Keanu approached the counter, his demeanor calm but purposeful. I'd like to pay my bill earlier, he said, placing his card on the counter. The cashier hesitated, her eyes shifting uncomfortably. Sir, she began softly, her voice carrying a note of regret. The waitress who helped you earlier, she's not here anymore. Keanu frowned slightly, confusion flickering across his face. What do you mean? He asked, his voice low but firm. The cashier sighed, her gaze dropping to the counter. She was let go. The manager wasn't happy about her covering your bill. It's against the rules. For a moment, Keanu stood there, the weight of her words sinking in. A storm of emotions brewed within him, guilt, frustration, and disbelief. Fired? For helping him? The thought seemed absurd. He felt responsible, even though her actions had been her choice. But standing there, he realized he couldn't let this end here. Thank you, he said quietly, sliding a generous tip across the counter alongside his payment. Without another word, he turned and walked out into the cold night. The wind bit at his face as he made his way back to his car, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could make things right. The following day, Mia sat in her small apartment, the silence almost deafening. She had barely slept, her mind consumed by the events of the previous evening. The cafe, which had once been her safe haven, was no longer a part of her life. She tried to distract herself, flipping through old books and tidying her already spotless space. But the sting of losing her job and the uncertainty of what came next lingered in her chest like a dull ache. Seeking some reprieve from her thoughts, she switched on the television. The screen flickered to life, and her heart skipped a beat as a familiar face appeared. It was Keanu Reeves, seated for an interview. The host was asking him about his latest project, but within moments, the conversation shifted in an unexpected direction. "There was someone I met recently," Keanu began, his voice calm but laced with emotion. "Someone who showed me a small act of kindness when I needed it most. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask for anything in return. She just helped me. It reminded me that kindness still exists, even when we least expect it." Mia froze, her eyes locked on the screen. Her heart raced as she hung on to every word. She didn't need confirmation to know he was talking about her. Keanu continued, his expression serious but warm. "What she did may seem insignificant to some, but it meant a great deal to me. It was a gesture that I'll never forget. And if she's out there watching, I want her to know how much it mattered. If anyone knows who she is, I'd like to find her. I'd like to thank her." The world was watching as Keanu spoke with sincerity that transcended the usual polish of celebrity interviews. For a man known for his humility, this moment felt deeply personal. In her small apartment, Mia sat frozen in place, the sound of her heartbeat almost drowning out the voice on the television. She pressed her hands to her chest, trying to calm the swirl of emotions inside her: disbelief, gratitude, and a touch of nervousness. She had never imagined that her simple act of kindness would lead to something like this. As the interview wrapped up, Keanu's words lingered in her mind. "Kindness is rare, and when you encounter it, it stays with you. It changes you," he had said. Mia turned off the television and sat quietly, her hands trembling as she held the remote. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. What had felt like an ordinary moment, a fleeting gesture to help someone in need, was now something extraordinary. Her heart swelled with both humility and awe as she realized her actions had not only been seen but deeply appreciated. Keanu's interview sparked a wave of attention. Social media lit up with people sharing clips of his heartfelt words. And soon, the search for the mysterious waitress began. Messages of support and admiration flooded online platforms, with strangers inspired by the story of her selflessness. For Mia, the world outside her apartment suddenly felt different. The heaviness in her chest began to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. She didn't know what would come next, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her small act of kindness, she realized, had carried a ripple effect far greater than she could have imagined. A few days after the world learned about her act of kindness, Mia found herself walking through a quiet park near her apartment. The winter sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the frosted grass. Dry leaves crunched under her boots with every step, but her mind was elsewhere, swirling with questions about her future. The events of the past week felt surreal, from losing her job to seeing Keanu Reeves speak about her on national television. The weight of uncertainty still pressed against her, but there was a flicker of hope she couldn't quite ignore. The sudden hum of a car engine behind her pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, startled, to see a sleek black vehicle pulling up by the curb. The door opened, and out stepped Keanu Reeves. His presence was calm yet commanding, his expression gentle but purposeful. For a moment, Mia froze, unable to fully grasp what was happening. She had never expected to see him again, let alone here. In her quiet corner of the world, Keanu walked toward her, his gaze steady and filled with warmth. "You're the one who helped me at the cafe, aren't you?" he asked, his voice as deep and sincere as she remembered. Mia nodded, her voice catching slightly as she replied, "Yes, but it was nothing." Keanu shook his head firmly, his eyes never leaving hers. "To me, it wasn't nothing," he said. "It reminded me of the power of kindness, even in the smallest acts. You didn't know who I was. You didn't expect anything in return. You just helped because it was the right thing to do." His words struck a chord deep within Mia. She had always believed in the value of compassion, but hearing her actions described with such weight made her chest tighten with emotion. Before she could respond, Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. He extended it toward her, his expression earnest. Mia hesitated, glancing at the envelope and then back at him. "What is this?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "It's a small way of helping you move forward," Keanu explained, his tone gentle but resolute. "Inside is a check to ease some of the burdens you've been carrying. And that's not all. I've spoken to a friend who owns a well-known restaurant downtown. They're looking for someone like you, dedicated, hardworking, and kind. If you're willing, the job is yours." Mia's eyes widened as she processed his words. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the envelope, her mind racing. I don't know what to say," she stammered, overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity. "You don't have to say anything," Keanu said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Just know that this world needs more people like you. What you did that night mattered, more than you realize." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes, blurring her vision as she looked at him. She clutched the envelope tightly, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." Keanu smiled, a soft but meaningful smile that seemed to carry the weight of his gratitude. "You've already repaid me," he said simply. "Your kindness reminded me of what truly matters in life, helping one another, even in small ways. All I ask is that you continue being the person you are." Mia nodded, her tears spilling over as she tried to steady her breath. For the first time in days, she felt a profound sense of hope, as though the dark cloud that had hung over her was finally lifting. The heaviness in her chest was replaced by a warmth that spread through her entire being. As Keanu turned to leave, he paused and looked back at her, his expression thoughtful. "Mia," he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength, "your kindness rippled outward. It didn't just help me, it inspired others. Never underestimate the impact of what you do, no matter how small it seems at the time." With that, he stepped back into his car, giving her one last nod before driving away. Mia stood there, her heart racing, as she watched him disappear down the road. The crisp winter air felt lighter now, and the park around her seemed brighter. That evening, Mia sat at her small kitchen table, the envelope still clutched in her hands. She carefully opened it, her breath catching as she saw the check inside. The amount was far greater than anything she had ever imagined. Her eyes filled with tears once more, but this time they were tears of gratitude and relief. She thought back to Keanu's words and the quiet sincerity in his voice. He hadn't just given her financial help or a job opportunity. He had given her a renewed sense of purpose and validation for the values she held dear. Mia realized that her small act of kindness had set off a chain reaction, one that had not only changed her own life but reminded her of the profound beauty in human connection. The next week, Mia stepped into her new workplace, a bustling, high-end restaurant in the heart of the city. The staff welcomed her warmly, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged. The challenges ahead didn't feel as daunting anymore. She carried Keanu's words in her heart, a reminder that even the smallest gestures could ripple outward, creating extraordinary changes. As she tied her apron and began her first shift, Mia couldn't help but smile. The road ahead still held uncertainties, but she knew she could face them with kindness and determination. Her story had transformed, and with it, so had she. She thought back to Keanu's words and the quiet sincerity in his voice. He hadn't just given her financial help or a job opportunity. He had given her a renewed sense of purpose and validation for the values she held dear. Mia realized that her small act of kindness had set off a chain reaction, one that had not only changed her own life but reminded her of the profound beauty in human connection. The next week, Mia stepped into her new workplace, a bustling, high-end restaurant in the heart of the city. The staff welcomed her warmly, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged. The challenges ahead didn't feel as daunting anymore. She carried Keanu's words in her heart, a reminder that even the smallest gestures could ripple outward, creating extraordinary changes. As she tied her apron and began her first shift, Mia couldn't help but smile. The road ahead still held uncertainties, but she knew she could face them with kindness and determination. Her story had transformed, and with it, so had she. During her first few days at the restaurant, Mia threw herself into learning the ropes. She spent hours perfecting her understanding of the menu, memorizing ingredients, and observing how her coworkers navigated the fast-paced environment. She quickly earned the respect of the team through her dedication and positive attitude. Mia's warm demeanor didn't go unnoticed by customers either. Her genuine care and attention to detail left a lasting impression on those she served. One evening, as she delivered a plate of perfectly seared salmon to a guest, an elderly woman looked up at her with a smile. "You have a light about you, my dear," the woman said warmly. "It's rare to see someone who truly enjoys what they do." Mia's cheeks flushed with gratitude. In that moment, she realized how far she'd come from the days when she felt invisible and unappreciated. Each interaction, no matter how small, became an opportunity for connection and kindness. Outside of work, Mia's life also began to shift. Inspired by Keanu's impact on her, she started volunteering at a local shelter on her days off, offering meals and a listening ear to those in need. She found joy in giving back, knowing firsthand how much even a single gesture of compassion could mean to someone struggling. The shelter became a second home, a place where she could channel her energy into making a difference. One day, as she cleaned up after a busy lunch service at the restaurant, Keanu walked in. His presence brought an instant sense of calm and reassurance. "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing," he said with a smile. Mia beamed. "Better than I ever thought possible," she replied. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "You've always had that strength, Mia. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us it's there." As he left, Mia felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short time. The once daunting challenges now seemed like stepping stones, each one bringing her closer to a life filled with purpose and fulfillment. Months later, Mia had not only become one of the most valued employees at the restaurant, but also a mentor to new hires. Her journey inspired those around her, proving that resilience and kindness could turn even the darkest moments into a source of light. She often shared her story with others, encouraging them to believe in their own ability to create change. No matter how small, Mia's world had expanded in ways she never imagined. Her days were filled with meaningful work, genuine connections, and a sense of belonging that had once seemed out of reach. She had discovered the power of kindness, not just in receiving it, but in sharing it freely. As she stood by the restaurant's window one evening, watching the city lights twinkle against the dark sky, Mia smiled to herself. The road ahead would undoubtedly hold new challenges, but she was ready for them. She had learned that every step, no matter how uncertain, could lead to something beautiful. Her story wasn't just one of transformation. It was a testament to the extraordinary impact of compassion, resilience, and hope.